I'm not a politician. I can't tell somebody not to go to war. I can't tell them, a politician, to apologise. But I can make a garden which, if you're young, 6 years of age, 7 years of age, you look at it and go, oh my God. And if you're a grown up, you can do a bit sort of deeper reading.
Welcome to the Underground Podcast. I'm Kate, the gardener guru, horticultural consultant, and writer and presenter on all things gardening.
And I'm Phil, co-founder of Right O'Bara, a creative marketing agency for the home and garden sectors. Join us in conversation with those people shaping the UK's garden care industry.
So, without further ado,
let's get down and dirty. Hi there, Kate.
Hi, Phil. How are you?
I am very good, thank you very much. How are you doing, Kate? You all right?
I'm really good, and I'm quite excited about today's episode because it is more up my street than your street. Only because
exactly.
You know, my past life before I was compost queen was TV gardening and garden design and show gardens. And we're going to be talking to Irish TV gardener and award-winning international garden designer Peter Donegan. He's just such an interesting person to talk to. I know that sounds a bit naff, but he really, really is. He's got some wonderful stories about his gardens that he has built and created. But he also talks so beautifully and poetically about building these gardens and about what a lot of these gardens mean to the people that he has built them for. And I hope, that you enjoyed talking to Peter as well, Phil.
Do you know what? I thoroughly enjoyed talking to Peter, and I think it was a real eye-opener because I think when you know about garden designers and you hear about, we did this garden and we wanted to incorporate some, certain planting scheme or whatever, I think that's all good. But I think what Peter did, it really raised awareness to me about the thought process that a proper garden designer goes through to create something that is memorable, it's engaging for an audience, it works on so many different levels. And I think, for me, that was a real eye-opener and absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think it's very easy for us to get kind of bogged down in kind of compost and plant food and fertilizers and lawns and all this kind of thing. But actually, sometimes it's just nice to look at a garden, a special garden that's been created. And at the end of the day, that garden is using all of these products that you can get at a garden centre. But it's really looking at the top kind of echelon of how, what starts off life at a garden centre or a nursery is then going to be used and how it's going to be viewed by an audience.
That's right. I think bringing everything together, it just makes it greater than the sum of its parts. It's something which really tells a story.
Absolutely. So shall we get on and listen to Peter?
Let's do that. So I'm delighted to welcome onto the show today Peter Donegan, the garden designer from Ireland. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Hello, Kate. Huge fans of your show, as you are well aware. I think I bigged you up before we came on air for probably about another hour of how much of a fan I was of yours. But what a humbling privilege to be sitting speaking to you both today.
Oh, no, not at all. We're just really, really excited to be speaking to you because you've got lots to tell us, lots to talk about. So let's kick off, Peter, with how did you first discover your passion for garden design?
I was about to start this with how long have you got? But I'll go with the shorter version, which is I've got two parts to my brain, and one is complete imagination, and then something Dad used to say when we were sort of growing up. He would always say there's two types of daydreamers. One makes it real, and the other just talks about it.
Right.
And he'd always sort of allude to, I don't want to misquote him, but sort of which one are you? And so if you take that as the sort of the header at the top of the page, and then I was growing plants under my bed and I put them eventually down into Dad's garage, one of the old garages where you could drive a car into, and the windows over the top of the door. And the plants started leaning towards the light logically. Mm-hmm. He says, with a qualification in horticulture now or an education in it. And I queried why that happened. And the only answer a grown up had at the time for me was, well, because of the light. And that wasn't good enough for my head. So down to the library in 1980s Ireland or Britain at the time, and you've got no internet, and trying to figure out why plants lean towards light in a gardening book, which doesn't have that as in the index or the glossary, is a difficult thing to do. And all of a sudden, I know what phototropism, my apologies, is by definition at 6 years of age. And now you can figure out how to make plants do weird things in a sense. And that's the bit where sort of science sort of begins to kick in, to the point that I do my first garden age 9. And all of a sudden you start to realize that
age 9. Gosh.
Age 9, yeah. And then I think I was doing rooftop gardens on top of multi-story car parks when I was about 17 years of age. Went out on my own at 24, and all of a sudden you develop a reputation for being able to design gardens that are extremely difficult builds, but only ever appear like a daydream. Or you might walk in the door and say, how did you get this to happen? And so it becomes an element of, I don't want to say builds that nobody else wants to take on, but it builds, or a garden that becomes real needs a design that can actually work.
Yep.
And we started, obviously, my career coming up through the ranks of the industry was all of the difficult things that nobody else wanted to do. And at 17 years of age, when you're running a crew where you're building a croquet lawn on a tennis lawn and you've got a half a day to do it and there's a huge time constraint, then it's sort of calculations of how many buckets can a 130-ton tower crane lift onto the roof of a multi-story car park per minute, per hour, per how do we get the machine up here. And if you fast track to, say, 2018, a public garden that some might be aware of, then the first garden we did in France was 30 foot below street level, where the only access in was 1.6 meters wide.
Right.
And you've got two periods of 3.5 weeks to do the first phase, and then you're gone. And if you go into the second garden in the internal courtyard of a defence castle, I should add, it's not designed to allow machinery to go in.
Not at all.
No.
Then we looked originally at craning a crane onto the roof to crane the materials from the street to the roof into the central courtyard, realized that wasn't working. So then we took the original design, we deconstructed the whole thing down into pieces so that it could go through a 22 meter long Gothic archway that was 1.8 meters wide and 2.2 meters high, and then made it not look like it was ever made into pieces of Lego, if that makes better sense to you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, like, the list goes on, but that's sort of the bit. And I guess I have a mind, Kate, that just, it doesn't sit still. But most of the gardens we would do behind the scenes, there'd be a lot of, I guess, engineering or things to do. So when we hit the TV show, I think this is probably the best example of all of those years of experience meets education, meets surround yourself with the very best. We took a 1 acre site. They built the house in 10 days, and we had 8 days to build a garden at the same time whilst they were building the house. And when I say it's turnkey, the post box is built into the piers, the gates are hanging, the driveway's done, the lights are in, you flick the switch, there's oranges on the table and milk in the fridge. And I would have found that a stroll in the park, literally, pardon the cliche.
Really? Oh my goodness. So you're a problem solver, aren't you?
I don't get stressed. I'm one of 8 children, and I'm calm at all, like genuinely calm at all times. I'd get frustrated if there was no Jaffa cakes left, or silly stuff like that, or my Marx Brothers sort of DVD collection. What are they? You say didn't sort of work properly, but from a works perspective, I absolutely adore the fact that I will go 18 hours a day. My brain sleeps very well on very little sleep and under what I appreciate others would consider as high pressure. But to me, it's like being asked to play for Arsenal. It's apart from obviously the result of recent against Manchester United. We'll park that for another day, bad example. But it really is. You surround yourself with good people, and it's a stroll.
Well, I'm extremely jealous. Having done Garden Makeover TV myself, I was a living stress ball for 6 months. So
wow.
I wish you'd been on my team.
There you go. I wish I had to, Kate.
Anyway, so yeah, that's, goodness me, that's not what I was expecting you to say. That's quite fascinating. I'll have to go back and listen a bit more to what you've said again. So do you see yourself as somebody who transforms built environments with green spaces?
I think we're sort of very fortunate in the gardens that have been that we've been asked to do. If we take the first garden that was in 2018, that was in the dried up moat of a 13th century castle. It's 30 foot below street level. The castle has fallen in the Franco-Prussian War, the First World War, and the Second World War. They know there are bodies still beneath the ground. And you're one of 14 designers selected globally by default. Obviously, I've got an Irish accent, so the Bassons would have represented England, Fisher, Tomlin and Bowyer would have represented Wales. And your job, or I guess the remit put loosely, is to be respectful of the past, but for the children of today to have an eye to the future. It's a very beautiful but yet poignantly balanced sort of remit. But to woo people into a place where only bad things had ever happened, in short, where you sort of walked through and kept on walking, and to I guess by design make them stay there. I think that's probably one where the building is existing. I know it's a 13th century thing, and I get that. But when we go into the back, which is the internal courtyard, when we go into that, Henry Siriani was the architect that they brought in to build Europe's largest war museum and attach it to the back of the castle.
Right.
And that was sort of brutalist concrete going as far back as the eye could see. So we 13th century walls going around where they know that the dungeons, if I can use the word, go all the way down underneath the castle, down into the ground. But at the same token, the backdrop on sort of 45% of the castle is this vast, just blank concrete, totally at extremes with 13th century walls, if that makes sense. Yeah. And your job then is to evoke memory and to bring in scent. And in that context, there's a great big whopping distraction. I could turn around and give you a less seductive, sexy sort of example. But the biggest thing for us is, are they good people? Will it be a nice garden? Will it be a beautiful landscape? Can we do something to improve this?
So some people might not know if they're not watching kind of Irish TV. How did you get involved in the TV show?
So I don't watch TV either. My TV is genuinely disconnected, sitting in the corner, and I put it back in so people would stop asking me, "Where's your television?"
Oh,
but anyway, no. How I got into TV? Oh God, I gave this as an answer before, Kate, and people said no. At the end of it, they went, "No, give us the serious answer." And I genuinely mean it. I think if you want to chase TV, then I understand that. I never chased it. I'd actually gone in and done a radio interview at a garden show in Dublin where you've got, say, 40 other designers doing pocket gardens, small, medium, large, etc. And the state radio station asked me to do two interviews, on two different subjects, obviously. And I declined one which was based upon plant imports, and I just didn't want to get into the native, non-native thing on a public radio family-style broadcast. If it was your podcast, it'd be different because we'd have a to and a fro and we'd both see both sides. So we went with one on sort of how you build gardens, and they got talking to me about a 17th century estate we designed, which was 27 acres, and an 18th century estate we designed, which was 55 acres. And I was explaining how you plant an entire avenue of trees going 1.5 kilometers both sides in 3 hours, and how much this sort of costs and the numbers behind it. And so again, it's the design brief to design to equation to it's done, and not a bead of sweat dropped. And the producer of that radio show rang the producer of a television show and said, "I've just found the garden designer you need for your TV show. They rang me and said, hi, Peter, we'd like to talk to you about television. I was standing beside one of my friends at the time. He said to me, who's that? I said, TV show. And he went, another one. I'll put a penny in the jar for you. And I went, let's see how it goes. So when they came up to meet me, I didn't take it
seriously.
Not didn't take it seriously. I did take it seriously, but I was cleaning out the back of my Jeep in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. And we had a cup of coffee sitting on the boot of the Jeep. And Sharon, an absolutely lovely woman to this day, huge respect for her. And Sharon said to me, that's your uniform. And I went, sorry? And she went, we'll talk to you about it afterwards. And so the garden designer for two seasons had to wear a pair of shorts and a t-shirt because that's what she first saw me in. And that literally became it. It's sometimes as simple as that, Kate. And if I hadn't have had that phone, like we'd done TV, I guess, bits and bobs beforehand. So I wasn't new completely to it. But again, same thing, phone call just came in. Hey, we're from such and such a company. Would you mind?
Brilliant. Okay. So your projects span various countries and challenges. And do you have a standout project that significantly shaped your perspective on garden design?
Oh, that's a really hard question. If I was to take show gardens, there's probably one show garden we did in Melbourne, flower show, Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show, to give it its correct title, Kate. And that was ultimately based upon the suicide rates of Australian veterans post-service. And the notes that I had written pre any drawings being done was, if you have fallen, your name goes into a piece of stone. If you've fallen and your body is unfound, your name goes into a piece of Portland stone. But if you return post-conflict and your mind is never the same, then what happens?
Yeah, okay.
And when it was loosely based on the research that we had done in France, and they'd done one of these exhibitions, and the exhibition was a paradox, and it was called L'amour or love. And it explained how the ministries set the young soldiers with a bow or fast track the marriage, so that it would have something to want to return to. And then the next bit shows the love letters to and fro. And then the next bit shows the triumphant homecoming and all the hats going up in the air and etc. And then the next part shows the divorce rates going exponential because the mind was not the same. And partway through the show garden, Martin said to me, he said, what are you at, Peter? He said, I don't so much get it. And I said, look, I want to bring somebody from the highest to the high to the lowest to the low. I said, I'm not a politician. I can't tell somebody not to go to war. I can't tell them, a politician, to apologize, but I can make a garden which, if you're young, 6 years of age, 7 years of age, you look at it and go, oh my God. And if you're a grown up, you can do a bit sort of deeper reading, and the media will tell the rest of the story.
Of course, yeah.
But the Defence Force Welfare Association are a volunteer organisation based in Australia.
Right.
And they came in to give us, I guess, a vilification or a name at the bottom of the page for numbers and what happens and what really happens to veterans post-conflict. And the suicide rates in Australia for veterans, 107% higher if you're female to commit suicide than the normal populace, 30% higher again if you're male, the highest demographic of homeless. And the list sort of goes on. Oh. And I'll say, okay, I can't tell somebody that they're wrong, but what I can do is evoke an emotion through garden design, which is a difficult thing to do when you've got an Irish accent, but you're in Melbourne. And to put that in context, the note I'd made to Martin was, if I get this wrong, if the design is conveyed wrong, I'll never work in Australia again.
Right.
Understandably, that was what was in my head anyway. But if we do it right, and Martin finished the sentence and said, and if we save one life, then it's all been worthwhile. And it's a very unusual experience, Kate, to watch people walk to your garden with big beaming smiles, and then the highest of the high, and then literally cop or get what's actually happening in the garden, and the tears start rolling. Designing an emotion, or if I can analogize it for your listeners, if you listen to Solomon Burke singing Cry to Me, I think Dirty Dancing would have taken that song. Anybody would know it, just Google it. And if you close your eyes and you can sort of see that man who yearns for a woman he fell in love with, then I think you probably get the garden we designed very easily. Or as my dad would say, if you're a child or you've got a childish heart or an easy fall in love with heart, then it becomes one of them. And I think in that context, it's probably one that I think I'm most proud of, albeit it's the recent, but I think it's maybe a shame in a sense that it's only been temporary.
Right. Yeah.
If that makes sense. But it's gone. It's like the play comes to town, performs at the theatre, and you're talking about something that isn't available on the internet, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Goodness me. Thank you for sharing that. That sounds amazing. What year was that, Peter?
This was March 24. So
so only last year. Gosh.
Yeah. Only last year, just gone. The one prior to that told the story of a don't laugh at me just yet, but told the story of a man, in brackets Irish, some say it was self-penned, who couldn't tell a woman how he felt about her, but yet he sat and waited for her to arrive in a sort of a hamster wheel where she would never come because he could never say the three magic words, and he could never say the three magic words, but yet he still sat and waited. And I think that sort of evoked a different kind of an emotion, but at the same token, again, only temporary, but fascinating when you go from the sort of darkness into light and walk across water and come to the far side and sit down and realize that you're sort of left in this sort of poignant world of your own. But, you know, the example we would take from that, Kate, and give to, I think, gardens we've done for, not for show, for inverted commas, normal clients or normal gardens, if I may, is that, look, sometimes they decide, look, we want to have people over for dinner. We want 6 people, 8 people, and we want them to not notice the clock moving. And my point to them is, like, if we can do that show and make you weep for the right reason, you know, in the case of the veterans, certainly it did get the message out there, and it's conveyed in the media and done extremely well for them. But I think if we can do that in a show, then we can do it in a domestic back garden to a lesser degree, or to a more jovial, happier, happiness, stay longer with friends sort of degree. So
Goodness, so garden design is art, really. That's what you're talking about.
It's not always, Kate. I think, and again, I'll say, you know yourself from what you've done in TV, sometimes it's taken a very practical solution. Yeah. But practical, again, to quote my sisters, all 4 of them will tell you, practical are flat shoes at a wedding, and they never looked sexy. And my sisters would very much rather go through the pain barrier with the high heels on the whole day so that they look great in the photographs. And I think if you've got sort of accessibility requirements, and we had one of the television programs we did where mom had gone into to obviously have a child. There were some difficulties in birth. She came out a year and a half later from the hospital.
Oh my goodness.
Had never put her own child to bed, and to be polite about my wording here, and apologies in advance, ultimately mom had to learn how to speak, read, walk, everything all over again. The complications were a little bit more difficult. The bit that's important, I think, Kate, in that is that she wanted to go in the front door. These were the notes we got. Go in the front door and be able to put her children to bed. They were the requests that I got as a brief. And when we looked at it with designing just the front garden here, I remember presenting a set of designs, and we took a photograph of a local pub where they had wheelchair accessibility, which is a ramp going up, turns at 90 degrees, turns again at 90 degrees, turns again at 90 degrees and goes in. And we mapped it on the same as one of the doctor's surgeries that we know, which has the same 90 degree, 90 to 4, 90 degree bends or 3 90 degree bends. And we mapped it over the local hospital. And they were all the same. And I said, the point I made to the guys was, look, this woman if I'm responsible for this, then she's not leaving a hospital after a year and a half to go up a hospital ramp, to go in where she's supposed to feel like she's at home. And that front garden was designed so well that if you drove past the house, you wouldn't even know the ramp was there.
Right. Brilliant.
And it's not done in 90 degrees. It's curved up through a front garden. So but that's the bit where taking something practical and making it not feel.
Yeah. Making it beautiful.
Yes, ultimately. And that, if that's a daydream, then maybe it's a very practical one, but I think it's a balance of the example of what you're able to do if you have the right people by your side again.
What you were saying there, Peter, about the storytelling that you're incorporating within the gardens you're designing is absolutely amazing. And I've found it quite emotional, actually, listening to what you were saying, and really insightful as the thought process that you go through in designing the gardens. And especially the veterans one that you were saying about was absolutely fascinating.
I think. Look, it's not always that way, to be fair, Phil. Sometimes the remit of the designer is to, say in the case of a 17th century estate, a front of house, you never try and compete with the building. Your job is to sort of complement it. You're the pair of shoes or the pair of earrings, but you're not the dress, if that makes sense. And you don't try and compete with that. You just try and complement it. And sometimes it is that simple. But when that landscape is done incorrectly to a stately home or a manor or the domain, demesne phonetically spelt, that's when you sort of start to hear maybe more about something you shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the times the remit is, this is the building, we've done our research, you do your job, Peter, and there you go. Look, Jen, they're good people and it's a nice home. But that doesn't steal the media limelight, I guess, where the odd time you're humbled enough to be allowed to design a garden to deal with what is a very difficult subject. Mm-hmm. And the funny part in the Melbourne thing is, once they accepted the design, knew what it was about, they'd already made it the featured show garden that year. We had a television producer come into the garden, and it was a couple of hours before we opened for judging. Yeah. You've obviously got 9 days to build an entire garden. Your listeners can Google the garden when they're listening to this or after another time. But there's an old grass roof, and the part of the gutter's fallen down. I loosely based it upon Dad when Mom had passed, and so he meant to fix it, but the water's not coming into the house, so that's okay. And the grass is a little bit sticking out the side, and you should have cut the plants back sort of a year or two beforehand, but it can wait. The grass should have been cut about 3 weeks beforehand. Nicole, Martin's daughter, had researched the original sweets, the original coffees, the original tobaccos from sort of 1981 to 84, to the point that in 30 odd degrees heat, we had only put the roof on about an hour or two beforehand. And I got the leaf blower and I ran it up the path, closed the door behind me and left it and let the dust all settle. But we left all the jars sort of slightly open. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, the producer walked in the door and tears started coming to her eyes. We hadn't even told her what the garden was about. And she just went, oh my God, this reminds me of it smells like my granddad's house. Yeah. And that culmination of scents and smells and memories and family photographs and wood shavings on the floor and old tools, all original, and most of them family pieces. And mm-hmm. outside they'd found this old radio, and there was an AFL game playing, and she sat down in the old rocking chair with the tobacco sort of by the side, because all of the men would have smoked at the time. Yep. And I turned on the radio for her, and the radio was so old. She said to me, "What year is this AFL game?" And I said, "No, that's live. That's today." And she just closed her eyes, and the tears sort of came again. And that's what it evoked when you got into the garden. But when you stood to the outside, I guess the visiting public saw it as well. And so, yeah, but difficult, not easy to watch, not easy to see. But I think when you see young children come and smile, and mom is saying, giving you sort of a little wink, and then sort of moving on, then, you know, then the grown-ups sort of came back a little bit later on.
Yeah.
Then yes.
Yeah. No, that's really evocative. Yeah, it's amazing. So as a garden designer, I guess biodiversity and encouraging biodiversity into green spaces within urban environments is really important. How do you sort of manage that, especially when you're trying to deal with your designs with the demands of your client as well? I mean, do you try and incorporate biodiversity and bring that into your designs, or is that a lower priority for you?
It's there's two answers for you, Phil. I'm choosing my words slightly carefully here. So there's genuinely two answers to this. So if I take, and I'll stick with the gardens that we had done in France. The first garden in France was probably one of the, inverted commas, greenest gardens we've ever designed.
Okay.
But the headline wasn't biodiversity. The headline was the centenary of the ending of the First World War.
Yep.
But now that time has sort of passed, and the inaugurations and the embassies have sort of done their job, I guess. When I'm speaking about that garden, the reality is, I'll tell you now, there was no soil removed off site on that, not 1 inch. All stone was sourced locally. All the contractors were sourced locally. All of the plant material was sourced locally. Every single piece of it was either there or existed or was within a sort of 10-kilometer range of the castle. The trick, funnily enough, and this is the beauty about it, sometimes you look at things and they say, well, you know, everything was local. And I'm saying in my head, it looks like it was designed to show that everything was local.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make it beautiful. And when the local tag is pulled off the design or over the front door of the garden, the fictitious front door, I think I'll go back and say what I've said before about biodiversity or native plants or native trees or whatever remit you want to give.
Yeah.
If my invisible 6-year-old daughter or our son, or I bring Kate by the hand and I go, come on, I'm going to bring you to the most romantic place in the world. And she says, this is the least romantic place in the world. And I go, but hold on a second, Kate. It ticks all these biodiversity boxes. And she's going, but I don't even like crochet, or
yeah.
Gardening isn't my jazz. And I think the note I'd always make to the students when I'm speaking to them is, be careful with the remit that you don't get them sort of rearranged. The job of a public garden is to bring people in. And if we're converted, like we're the converted, you host one of the best gardening podcasts, plural, both of you, that I know. I don't need to preach to you to become more biodiverse, but the 6-year-old or 7-year-old has to turn around and go, oh my God, that is amazing how they've managed to do that. That is beautiful. Mom, wait, I'll show you this thing I've seen. Can you come with me? We went there with school and it was amazing. And that's the trick to it. And if I bring a group of 6 or 16-year-olds to a more biodiverse park and I bore the pants off them, then the fear, and I'm being choice with my words, but there's a balance necessary where you don't bore the pants off a sort of 6 to 16-year-old when you're trying to woo them into the industry. And we, I guess, or maybe some TV personalities tend to write an article once annually in the Telegraph or the Mail saying young people should garden more. And whenever I see that, which is annually, then I sort of say in my head, well, hold on a second. What 6 or 16-year-old is reading the Daily Mail #1 or the Telegraph? I'm not being disrespectful to the newspaper, but if you're not reading a newspaper, then you're certainly not reading the gardening section. So that's that part out of the way. So now it's just self-PR, if I may. If you bring it back to the gardens, most people will tell you who get into gardens. I know I'm segueing off the biodiversity thing slightly. Apologies, Phil. But most young people who are people who are in the industry today will tell you, my grandfather, or there was one school teacher, or I remember listening to an interview, or I saw a guy doing this and I was amazed by it. Mm-hmm. And in gardening, sometimes I think we do the thing that makes us smile. He says, I'm also guilty of it. And at the same token, you forget that sometimes your job is also to play the guitar with your eyes closed, and other people will go, I need to learn how to play guitar. Mom can have one for Christmas. And when Alex Higgins was playing snooker, or when the Lionesses won the World Cup, or whatever the case may be, you get to turn around and go, I want the jersey, I want the snooker cue, I want the whatever the case may be. And I think in a sense of answering your question, biodiversity is hugely important. We would try and hide it into gardens where they haven't discussed it with us, but it's not, doesn't sometimes need to be so obvious, and sometimes equally it does.
Goodness me, that's quite an answer.
I mean, what you were saying there about trying to encourage young people into gardening and that side of things, it's inspiration, isn't it? You want to inspire them from what they're seeing to then want to further their knowledge and get into it that way. Peter, many of the new builds nowadays are actually limited with the amount of outdoor space that they're provided. Each house is provided. How could you overcome those constraints to sort of create a meaningful green space?
Ooh, I understand the question.
Yeah, it's not an easy answer.
No, it came up in conversation about 3-4 weeks ago, and we were talking with a friend of mine, and he was saying he wanted to get an apple tree, but the apple tree variety he wanted needed a pollinator. Mm-hmm. And he said, my garden won't take the 2 apple trees. And I said, well, why don't you just buy one for your next door neighbor? And he went, yeah, okay. And it's not... Yeah. It's not rocket science. It's just an extra 20 quid. He went next door. He went, hey, Jim, I bought you an apple tree. Or I'll plant it out your back garden whilst you're away on holidays and put a bow on it. And now everybody wins. And I get that. I think the best gardens in small spaces I've seen, if you take these 2 gardens, one of them being my friend's who's bought a tree, who has to decide how he's going to present it to his neighbour because he's afraid he's going to leave it in a pot. And so either he plants it for him or he doesn't. But the best landscapes I've seen have almost got invisible dividing lines between each other's garden. The worst are probably where the soil is brutal. The whole back garden is porcelain paved and fake grass paved. The bleached trees goes in and the raised walls go in, and you can see the pictures are 10 a penny on Instagram. Yeah. The reality is we had a consultation with a lady of recent, and the fake grass aside, the porcelain paving aside for now, the bleached trees that she had were quercus, which is oak. Right. And they're standing at 3.5 meters tall before the first branches sort of go out. Yeah. And the conversation I'm having with a couple of friends of mine, where if she goes away on holidays for, say, 3 years and doesn't have a long-handled lopping shears or a 6 meter tall A-framed ladder to maintain those trees, they are going to turn into normal trees. Yeah. And it is going to be an absolute field day for tree surgeons. Yeah. If that comes to the fore. And so to go full circle away from that, what I'm saying is if the best gardens that I know are those where they've got somebody in to, say, maintain the estate. We are brought in this case, unmentioned, to consult with the sort of association. And what the association decided upon was they needed to do something to make the estate better for the planet. Mm-hmm. And also they didn't want people cobbling or tarmacadaming or whatever, blocking in the entire surface of the front garden. They wanted it to be greener, inverted commas. And so we came up with a plan where we sort of had a list of, say, I'm being facetious here, but I'll shorten it down for you, say about 30, 50 plants that would look good in a small front garden. Yep. And we had about 10 trees that would fit out your back garden. Mm-hmm. And you could pick one tree and 5 of them, or 17 of them, or 12 of them. And you could have your garden designed like that. So all the front garden sort of did a job. But once we went past, say, 20% of the houses using that list of 30 plants, we then changed to a next 30, and the trees sort of similar. So you've got something that's coming in and out of flower, say, in October, November, December. You've got the plants that are coming in this sort of time of year. You've got the bulbs that are coming up in the main areas. You've got the larger trees out in the main open areas. And the whole thing had some sort of a system to it. Yeah. And it just clicked, and it works beautifully. But if you turn around and go, okay, no, I live here. I close my front door, and that's it. Deliver my post. I'm going to work. See it tomorrow. No interest. Then you've got a series of maybe leaning towards more individuals where the gardens are usually lower maintenance. And the thing we as an industry know about lower maintenance, if houses or homes or apartments are of a transient nature where people sort of move on, then the renter nor the rentee invests too much or too heavily into what will cost them money to maintain, or, inverted commas, not be looked after. Mm-hmm. If we go to a higher end renting payment or a higher end value home building, then we tend to find the remit is slightly different, because they want people to stay longer. And now we're back full circle on that again. And it ticks the boxes. And we all know, if you're sitting in a park and you've got the sound of birds and nature and mental health and well-being and all of those, not to be disrespectful in any way, but you're ticking all of those boxes, then people tend to stay longer. And as I would say to the young students, there's a reason why the woman who you fall in love with, or the man who you fall in love with, who you go to get married, it's not in a retail car park where you've got a TK Maxx sign or a B&Q sign in the background. It's always, or invariably, poetically, he says in the Daydream, to that 17th century domain, which is filled with trees and the sounds of the birds. And you walk in the door and you don't know why, but you go, oh my God, this is lovely. And that's exactly it. So, as eloquent as I can say it, there's a very simple answer. Yeah. I'm not a fan of one, but there's not a lot I can do about it. But we try.
Yeah. But I mean, that's interesting. So I like the idea what you were saying about collaboration. I mean, you gave the example about the apple tree, but also to think just between houses and having sort of a common sort of planting system, or something where things are shared, and you're creating more of an environment, not just your pocket handkerchief-sized environment, but a much larger environment as well.
Well, it's funny, Phil, I don't want to call it a sales pitch, mm-hmm. because that's the wrong way to do it, or the wrong way to say it. The reality is, my note to the association, if I might call them that, a group of really wonderful, forward-thinking, bright-minded, intelligent people who owned their own home as individuals. My opening line to them was referencing one of my clients, whose note to me on a regular basis is, make my wife smile and add value to my property. And the point I made to them very simply was, it's not rocket science. Like Sarah Beanie had done it as a TV program a long time ago, where she took a street somewhere, Londonshire anyway, and they painted the fronts of all of the walls sort of in 3 different colour schemes. And they all look sort of the same, and how it added value to the property, and they read the different gardens. So this has been around since time began. Yeah. And in this case here, the thing became, well, how much is it going to cost us? And then the question became, well, how much value does it add to your property? And once we turn around and go, look, it's going to cost you, I don't know, $12 on it, or €1,000 or whatever the case may be, it was. Then we brought in the auctioneer, and he sat down with them and said, if Peter does this, and if the painter guy does this, your house will increase by approximately. And they went, oh. So now, without being, taking away the good of all of the things that we're doing, I don't mind why they put it in. I sleep better that it's gone in. That I'm clever enough to ring a friend of mine or a guy who I know who owns an auctioneer store sort of locally and say, would you mind coming in and having a chat with these people to explain monetarily what it will do? Then will I make them smile? Yes. Will it add value to your property? Yes. Now it's a worthwhile investment. I understand that it's their money, but it's unfortunately, it's not always the case that I think a group of people with small back gardens of their own realise, well, actually, we're one part of one greater landscape.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one that hopefully is simple, might take you a little while to think of it, but do you have a plant or a flower that will always put a smile on your face, one that you can't be without? And whatever you're feeling, that plant or flower will just lift your spirits.
Jeez. Okay. There's one tree that I think I've only ever planted two of, Kate, and it's a long word alert. A plus laburnum-cytisus adami. So it's got the long pendulum flowers of the laburnum. If anybody knows or Googles laburnum, what water double I at the end, waterii, I think it is, and you'll get these 14-inch long sort of pendulums of yellow flowers. And the plus laburnum-cytisus adami is a purple, yellow, and mauve flower where it's got the three of them on the one plant. And the first time I saw that, I went, oh my God, this is rock and roll stuff to a 16-year-old geeky kid in Cliff Richard corduroy trousers who looked like a younger Jarvis Cocker. And I've only ever been humbled to plant two of them sort of since. And I think that probably I'd have to say is the first. It's like the first time hearing Hendrix. It's just there, you get it or you don't. And they never do, laburnum never do what they're told. They're wonky trees. They're not Petula Jack Montiai. They always go with a kink. Look brilliant as an avenue, but they always tilt in sort of naturally. And it's just a question of which way they'll go. So yeah, I think that's a good question. Great question, actually.
Well, I think that just about wraps things up, to be honest with Peter. So I'd just like to say thank you so much for your time. And we've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been absolutely fascinating finding out about what you do and just the storytelling that you're weaving into the garden designs. Just amazing. So, thank you so much.
Your imagination and your storytelling is just beautiful. So thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you, Phil. Genuine, humbled, honoured, and a huge fan, as you're well aware. And thanks for having me on. I've fulfilled this and the Blue Peter badge. Were about the only two things that really eclipsed my career, and I've just ticked one of them off the box.
Oh, we'll be so quoting you on social media now.
There you go.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye now.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, could I ask a small favour? Please take the time to review the show and share us with your colleagues. It really does make a difference and will help others to find us too. To keep up to date with the latest happening from the Underground, or sign up to our email newsletter at theunderground.fm. I'm Kate Turner, the Gardener Guru. I'm a horticulturist, garden consultant and presenter. To find out more, check out my website at gardenerguru.co.uk.
And I'm Phil Wright, the founding partner of Wright O'Bara, a creative marketing agency specialising in the home and garden sectors. And for anyone bringing a new product to market, we've created a handy 7-step guide to help take your product marketing from zero to hero. Find out more at wrightobara.com.